I will move to questions the Chairman and Cabinet members until the 45-minute continuous period for questions and answers has ended. And again, it's Councillor Thomas.
Question 25 to the Chair.
Thank you very much, Councillor. Well, I've laid out the tables for you in the paper. They're rather difficult to read. I suppose the point I would make to overlay it is that perhaps it's probably more worthwhile looking at what's actually built out in the borough rather than the planning applications itself, because one thing, the planning being part of the system, whereas the actual development cycle, if you actually look at what actually happens in the borough, it really actually counts where you look at the build-out side of it and what the numbers tell you there. So I would say to the Councillor that you're probably looking at this in a slightly... you're only looking at this in a certain way, whereas actually a more holistic way of looking at it would be to look at construction more generally. But I'm willing to take a supplementary on that.
Supplementary? Does he not agree, but notwithstanding all his squirming there, there's actually... This is a woeful record compared to the Council's target level of 33% affordable housing. And given our earlier discussions about warts, will he undertake to add this to the list of performance measures highlighted on the front page of the Council's website?
Well, thank you. I didn't think I was squirming, but I wasn't looking at myself. So I have to say it's absolute nonsense that this is a woeful record. If you would ask me about construction figures, you would find that actually 35% of all units that were built out last year alone were affordable units. So actually, I think you'll find the Council's doing rather well on that measure alone. Your analysis is also not effective because you're looking at it from a site-by-site basis, whereas actually if you look at it from a borough basis, we do rather well. Some sites deliver 100% affordable housing, some sites don't deliver much at all because there might be particular issues with that site, viability, land remediation, those sorts of costs. So your analysis from the start is all wrong, in my opinion, Councillor. Overall, Wandsworth does deliver affordable housing. We do not believe, though, in delivering large quantities of social rent housing because, frankly, we believe it warehouses poverty.
Councillor Sutters.
Supplementary. Would the Chair agree with me that it would be foolish anyway to impose 33% on all schemes when in fact they can't afford it, and that we do go to some lengths to get assessments on all the schemes that come before us, and actually our colleagues on the other side do have access to these?
Yes, I would. It's an open process, and to a certain degree 33% of nothing is nothing, whereas if you can be practical and pragmatic at points, whereas trying to strive to deliver your targets, you can find that your net outcome is actually far greater social or affordable housing than you might otherwise get if you religiously stuck to targets such as in other London boroughs like Lambeth or Hammersmith and Fulham under Labour, where they essentially missed out on the development cycle, and many sites that could have been delivered have never been delivered, and the residents of those boroughs unfortunately have lost out.
Councillor Hallmark.
Yep, the SIL, which is a highly exciting innovation in the world of planning. It's essentially something that I think can be welcomed. The current Section 106 regime we have, I think, is actually rather prehistoric. SIL provides a very much more efficient way, a catch-all levy for planning gain. It will be to the benefit of the borough in terms of what the residents get out of it in terms of infrastructure improvements, and it will be also to the benefit of developers because they'll clearly know as they go into the planning process what is expected and required of them.
Councillor Hallmark.
Thank you. Is the Chairman aware that some people out in the real world think that developers only pay SILs or Section 106 to make an unacceptable development acceptable? Can he give us assurance that his committee will always look at development on planning merits rather than money?
Absolutely. I can assure the councillor that we certainly do make sure that we look at planning merits, and that goes back to my original point, which is why I think one of the problems we have with 106 is it does look rather vague, can look from the outside to people who are not involved with the planning process to be a little bit murky and strange. And I think that's why the SIL should be welcome, because it is a very clear mechanism for delivering planning gain in the borough. And I hope as a result it will be much clearer what the benefits of development can be, and also when a development is not acceptable, it's still not acceptable. Thank you.
Next question, Councillor Cooper.
Yes, I'd like to put the question to the Chair of the Planning Applications Committee.
Thank you, Councillor, for your question. Slightly confused, because my understanding was of the Green Deal well, in terms of your point anyway, and your question, was that your mayoral candidate colleague actually was supportive of far tighter controls, green controls on basement conversion. So maybe a slight tension between you and your colleague's views there. I mean, one thing I would say on this is that it's still a consultation, and that really is the focus at the moment, and input is needed on that. I would say personally that there is quite a lot of advantage in getting savings for residents, in fact, on improving cavity wall insulation, on loft insulation. There's a lot of home economics in it, in my mind. But interested to hear a bit more about your tension.
Cooper.
Well, I would hope that he would, supplementary, I hope he would understand that there's a difference between wanting tighter controls of development of basements and supporting something that, as you say at the end of your reply, you refer to rigid mechanism, and I think that is the problem that's identified in the current proposal, that it's described as a driver. And would you not agree that something that's described as a driver is in fact a rigid mechanism, because that's what you've said?
I'm in favour of limited, clear and effective regulations, as everyone is. And what I'm not in favour of, as you point out in your question, is nanny state mechanisms, something we got rather a lot of under the previous Labour government, including 3,000 crime prevention measures, at least 12 pieces of legislation on consumer protection, and having a licensing act which required circuses to pitch up and fill in lots of forms just to be able to have a circus on the site. So I think this is something which could be quite beneficial. It is a nanny state, and it's a consultation. It certainly isn't policy as yet.
Councillor Sutters, the next question, please.
Question number 28 to the Chairman of the Planning Applications Committee.
Thank you. Just to overlay this question response, the pre-application charges is something which a number of other London boroughs have incorporated into their planning service. We believe in Wandsworth that it will provide an effective, professional and open service, whilst also receiving value for money for the planning service in the borough.
Oh, Councillor Randall's not here, is she?
I'll ask the question on behalf of Councillor Randall.
Thank you. I'll refer you to the answer set out in the papers.
Supplementary. Could the Chairman assure me and the occupants of the Trident Centre in Bickersteth Road in Tooting that Wandsworth Youth Enterprises and the voluntary organisations which are there, that his undertaking in the first part of this answer to protect community facilities will indeed be upheld and not swept aside for political considerations by your party?
Well, it's a slightly strange question. I don't think an offer has been put on that site, and indeed there's no planning application in the process. So I can't give you any assurances, but I don't believe there's any acquisition being made on that site. So.
Question, Councillor Davies.
Question 30 of the Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Davies, for your question. Members will be aware that the recent announcement that the power station REO has now gone bankrupt and has appointed administrators, Ernst & Young, to facilitate a sale of the site. Knight Frank has now been appointed to provide agency services for the site, and I believe a sale process is being undertaken, which will take, I'd imagine, around 9 months.
A supplementary, Madam Mayor. I know to some extent it's crystal ball glazing, but what impact, if anything, does the Chairman think that the delay in the project is likely to have on the wider Nine Elms site?
Well, one thing I would say is that if you look at the power station site as an asset now, as to perhaps what it was 3 or 4 years ago, it certainly seems to be much more investable. You now have a framework in place, a planning framework in place, which is pro the development of up to 16,000 new homes and 25,000 new jobs. You have also the good news that the gas holders on the southwestern part of the site are going to be decommissioned, which essentially releases that part of the site from constraints that were there in the past. And then you have a commitment from the government and the GOA, as along with Wandsworth Council, to try and deliver a Northern Line extension into the heart of Battersea, into the heart of the site, which will enable the densities which are proposed. So I think from a sort of investor perspective, as well as from a planning perspective, I think the opportunity that the power station presents is still there, and I think it's stronger than it has been in past years.
Second supplementary.
Councillor Hogg.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. An increasing number of observers are saying that Battersea Power Station itself should be demolished to make way for a viable scheme. Does the Chairman agree that the retention and renovation of the power station should be central to any proposal?
I thank the councillor for his question. Part of our vision for the Nine Elms and part of the vision we had for the site itself is that we have a new town centre built around the Battersea Power Station. The power station is an important part of this borough, and its structure is indeed an important heritage landmark for Wandsworth. So Wandsworth would be keen to support the retention of that building as part of the wider plans. Of course, the final decision, it's a matter for English Heritage. English Heritage of Grade 2 listed the building, and they are the final arbitrators on what the future of that building will be. But our vision is set out publicly and clearly to all residents, to all investors, all developers, that the power station is central to our aspirations, our vision for the Nine Elms.
Councillor Boswell.
I thank the councillor for her question. I understand, I think, what the councillor is driving at, but as you can see from the written answer, we've had some difficulty because HMO properties relate to houses where there are 6 or more unrelated people living within them, and that of course excludes the bulk of most applications that this council receives, and therefore I'm afraid it's difficult for us to provide any meaningful data for the councillor.
Councillor Maxwell Scott.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Question 32 to the Chairman of Planning.
Thank you, councillor, for that question. We've set out a number of points about the localism bill. What I would say is that a lot of the things that the government has strived to in the spirit of the localism bill around planning, I would say Wandsworth was already doing. We are proactive. We encourage developers to engage with residents before they submit planning applications, because we believe that having a meaningful dialogue with your local community is a way of ensuring that both residents and local resident groups get a fuller understanding of what is proposed, and also the opportunity to understand the ramifications for their local community. So much of what is set out within the localism bill, I believe, we are already doing in Wandsworth. That said, I think there are still opportunities to be better, to be more effective in the way we have a dialogue with residents, and I welcome the proposals within the bill.
Thank you. I'd like to thank the Chairman for his answer. And just to follow on from that, I'd like to know if he were to write to the Secretary of State or speak to him, I mean, what more sort of morsels of localist pie would you like to see fly off Eric Pickles' plate? What more could the localism agenda do? I mean, for instance, not just to help local people, but I think also local businesses, which I think is an issue we need to think about more and more.
I thank the councillor. I think the one thing that we are seeing in dialogue with government is quite an interesting development around the localisation of business rates. And I think what that does as a principle is it will bring back into play many businesses in the borough who perhaps have felt slightly disengaged from local government, because local government has, in their minds, has been all about focusing on ratepayers, residents, not on businesses themselves. So I think the localisation of business rates is an opportunity to bring in a whole constituency of the borough that we haven't perhaps engaged with as much as we could have in the past. So very exciting. That could mean new things, and it could also encourage a much greater enterprise culture in local government, whereas councils compete to attract business because they know at the end of the day it hits their bottom line.
Councillor Johnson.
I'm sure that Mr Shapps and Mr Pickles would be disappointed to learn the apparent lack of interest he's noted among Wandsworth residents in participating in the development of neighbourhood plans, one of the sort of cornerstones of this revolution in planning to the neighbourhood level. I was wondering, you know, based on that assertion, I mean, is he quite sure about that? Is he quite sure that what he said earlier in regard to residents feeling they're well consulted by planners, does that apply to residents in Putney Riverside who are extremely dissatisfied with the hand that the Wandsworth planning system has dealt them?
Well, let's deal with the issue of neighbourhood plans. They are there, they have been set out, and if residents want to take them forward, there is an opportunity to do so. I suspect that neighbourhood planning is probably more appropriate for rural councils than it is for a London borough like Wandsworth, where there is a far more complicated demography. That said, the whole point of localism is that it's up for residents to do and to take things forward, and as yet none have, but these are still very early days. In terms of the Riverside residents, the planning process is what it is. Some residents are very happy with what the planning delivers for them, some are not. I can't comment on specific residents who might have a grievance over how we approach applications. All I can say is that we do our best to deliver a good service for the borough, and I think if you look at our borough compared to other boroughs, and you look at the last 15-20 years, we have maximised opportunities, and we've been able to generate and bring back into regeneration many parts of the borough that other places wouldn't have been successful in doing so.
Councillor Carpenter.
Question 33 to the Chairman.
I thank the councillor, and of course consultation is always encouraged, and as I understand in this case of the Putney Exchange, the architect has met with the Putney Society on several occasions.
Thank you for your support for consultation. As you know, this scheme, if it went ahead as it currently is configured, would have a considerable impact on the appearance of Putney High Street, and I welcome your support for further consultation with the public.
Councillor Mann, could you put your microphone on? Thank you.
Could I ask that he uses his good offices to speak to the planners and the developers to see what could be done to retain this stained glass and for it not to end up in the builder's skip?
I thank the councillor for his question, and I will of course go away and see what can be done. I think just on a wider point though about this application, I think it is exciting. I think Putney Town Centre does need some improvements. It has seen better days, and these sorts of applications which will improve the retail offer in the town centre are to be welcomed, and I look forward to coming back to the councillor on his particular issue around stained glass windows. Thank you.
Also, Mrs. Vanessa Graham.
I thank the councillor for her question, and of course I think this is a really good example of what the planning process can deliver on the ground for local residents. This year alone we've been able to achieve through the planning permission at Marco Polo House a docking bay for Boris bikes, and last year alone we also were able to achieve some revenues and also a docking bay for Boris bikes. The infrastructure is starting to develop. Boris bikes have been very successful in central London. I think they will also be very successful in Wandsworth too.
Councillor Graham, could I ask you to use your mic? Well, thank you.
Supplementary, Madam Mayor. It says in the answer that further contributions are expected. I wonder if the Chairman could perhaps suggest where he feels these may be made.
We have a number of, I thank the Councillor for a question. We have a number of large schemes in the pipeline, and I'm confident that we are able to deliver more money and more land for the Boris Bike scheme in this borough to make it a success.
Councillor Mrs Nardelli.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Question 35 for the Chairman of the Planning Applications Committee.
I thank the Councillor for her question. It's always a huge challenge when you are setting out with a master plan and dealing with planning applications and drawings and images to say what kind of community you can create in the Nine Elms, an area which will only be really developed to its full extent 20, 25 years from now. So always a real challenge, but an exciting challenge too. And opportunities are already emerging. It's quite clear that there's going to be huge opportunities to create a community which not just is beneficial to the Nine Elms area itself, but also to those residents who live in parts of Queenstown, parts of North Battersea, where there's quite significant unemployment. Our latest economic study suggests that at least 1,500 local jobs will be created out of the boon, which will be the Nine Elms regeneration. There will be a cultural strategy, and there will be a linear park, and there will be places of activity and opportunity, a new town centre, a new heart. I think there's a long way to go yet, but certainly the ingredients are there to make a very successful community in that part of Battersea.